been a couple months since I worked on the Kawasaki Prarie, and last time we worked on it, after rebuilding the carburetor, fresh gas in there, it was able to start easy enough, but it didn't run very well at all. Didn't seem to have any power, and it was emanating some pretty strange noises from the engine. And I had removed the primary cover here and taken the entire clutch assembly off and ran the engine without it, and still had the same engine noises. So I've determined now what I need to do is take a look at the top end and see if I can determine if there's something broken in the valve train. So I'm going to have to remove the seat, and I'm going to remove the tank cover and tank. Well, I got the tank out and got some access to the top of the cylinder here. This is your valve cover, and this is the access port for where you would set your clearance on the intake valves. The exhaust one must be on the back side here. I can't quite, yeah, right back here I could feel it. And then from this line right here down to about here is your cylinder head. So I think to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this access cover off and take a peek in there. Well, it covers off, and what we've got is it's a single cylinder with 2 intake valves, probably 2 exhaust valves, and the valves are pretty much actuated by the same setup here. So the intake valves, since it's a single cylinder, the intake valves open at the same exact time. And when I rotate the crankshaft, that seems to be happening. I can't see anything obvious to indicate that there's a problem here on this side. Try and remove this valve cover, and so first I removed the upper engine mount bolt, and if this mount was rigid mount, there'd be no way to get it out. So it looks like it's designed to swivel out of the way. So that would explain how you can take this cover off without taking the motor out of the frame. That's exactly what this does, swivels up out of the way. I'm going to remove the ignition coil, which is right here, because there's only one bolt holding it on, and it plugs in with a couple of wires, and then the spark plug boot, of course, just comes right off, and just to get it out of the way so I don't have to worry about breaking it, and also give me a little more clearance. Well, it's fall. It's been a few months since I bothered messing with this Kawasaki Prarie. Last thing I had decided that I needed to do was to pull the motor, because I couldn't get this head off with it in the frame. No matter how I tried, it seemed like everything was getting in the way. So I decided I'm going to pull the motor. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this front rack assembly and the whole front fender assembly. 4 12mm bolts make short work of removing this front rack. Once you get the rack off, to take the front fender assembly off, you get a screw underneath here, and there's another one on the other side in the same position. And you got a screw here, and then a screw there, and then you've got to separate it from the footboard. And that's the hardest part, because this one's got a nut and bolt assembly, but these two actually screws thread into nuts that are actually attached to this backing brace here, and they tend to get really corroded from all of this mud and dirt and stuff that gets on them. So this one actually came out pretty easy. This one I might be able to get out when I put something on the other side to hold the nut, but this one's really seized in there, so I'm going to put some penetrant on it, put some heat to it, and see if I can get it loosened up. That's going to be the hardest part, I think, of removing this fender assembly. That figures. Finally decided to work on this thing, and it starts raining. While I've got some penetrating oil working on these screws that are stuck in the front, turns out these are also stuck. Decided to work on taking the back fender rack and fender assembly off. the rack. There's a couple of long bolts here that got nuts on the bottom of them there, and then you get a couple of bolts here. And you've got some screws here under the seats. And you get these two 10mm bolts here in the back. It's also underneath the seat area. And then you get the same god-awful screws to deal with on the footrests, floorboards I should say. Well, I started to work on taking this fender assembly off, and then I realized how involved that was getting because of the fact that I didn't realize, but this is all one piece here, this whole tray. So you've got to remove the battery, and then more troubling is the fact that all of this wiring and everything and the components are on this bracket. So you take this screw out, you got to take this bracket out, and all this wiring would have to be disconnected and allowed to run back through down this hole. So now I'm wondering whether or not this motor can be removed without removing this assembly. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this guard right here so I can get a better look underneath here. Well, sure looks like you've got to take this assembly off whether I want to or not. This whole rear fender assembly off, which means I'm doing all these wires. The reason why I think that is because I just tried to remove this side shroud right here even, and there's a small screw here and then a larger screw here. But then there's a third screw, and that's actually was hidden behind here, and there's a huge block of dirt I removed under there, and there's a rusty head of the screw. I could barely get a screwdriver on it with this fender mud flap thing here in the way, and then it's rusted anyway, so that's going to be a whole project getting that one screw out I can see. And then from what I can see behind here is the drive shaft where that hooks on there. I think you're going to need better access than just this cover being off of here to get that out. So looks like I've got to remove this whole monstrosity. So I'm going to take these two 10mm bolts out. I'm going to take these screws out here. Take this screw out here. Take the battery out. Unplug whatever wires I have to unplug and undo to get this all out through the hole here. I just want to make a quick note of the fact that these two 10mm bolts in the back here also had these little washers. They're kind of like grommets almost. And then these screws here also have washers the same style. And these two were already removed. I don't know if that was done by somebody previous to me or if I did that last time I was working on it. I don't remember. Okay, you remove one screw here and this whole assembly comes out. Once you do that and you remove the battery, it gives you a better idea of what you're working with as far as what you've got to disconnect on this. This little solenoid looks like the starter solenoid here won't fit through that hole, so you're going to have to disconnect the wiring from that. Looks like that's as simple as just the two cables, battery cable on one side and the starter supply cable on the other side, and this clip right here, and that'll come off. And then looks like this plug just comes off here and disconnects from this this electrical unit here. So I guess this was in this rubber cup. Alright, once you get all the plugs unplugged, then you disconnect the cable, starter supply cable right here off of the starter solenoid. This kind of comes out far enough where you can see that there's a quick disconnect right here, so that you can disconnect it right here. And this must be an inline fuse by the looks of it. If you lift up on the back here, this piece right here actually falls out. So you just want to know that that's how these go in. Up underneath there, they're kind of like a spacer. In the bottom of the battery box, you've got this rubber cushion pad. You need to lift this up. There's two screws here that hold this bracket in, but they also screw through the fender assembly into the frame, so these have to be removed. These top stuck screws, I was able to get a impact driver in there and break them loose that way. However, I don't think that's going to work on these down here because it's tight in there. I'll try it, but if that doesn't work, I'll probably just end up grinding off the the little nut that they welded to the back of this brace, and then when I go for reassembly I'll just put a new nut and washer in there. These screws that were stubborn holding this bracket on underneath the battery, they're actually a little bit longer. I was able to put an extension on so I could reach down in there and get them with the impact driver. Okay, these aren't, even with penetrating oil on them and letting them sit and pounding on them, they're not coming out, so I'm going to drill the heads off, and then after I get the fender assembly out of the way, at some point during reassembly I'll use a grinder to grind off the little nuts that are welded, tack welded to the actual floorboard, and just put a regular nut and bolt in there as a replacement. But I'll worry about that after I see if I can get this motor running properly. Okay, I drilled off some of the heads and was able to get this assembly off. Still have one over there I missed, and then this is the one that was down in the battery box. That one came out, this one didn't. I drilled the head off. Once I removed it, now I see it's a very long shaft that's left there. I should be able to get some vice grips on there and some penetrating oil and maybe even some torch heat onto this metal bracket, and I should be able to get that out and be able to reuse that hole. If you can get this center screw out and drill out the bottom ones that are stuck, or remove whichever ones you can remove, you can get this little reinforcing bracket off the back here. The front's got this one here, it's shaped like this, and then there's the back one here has the unusual shaped one that's got this little extra piece that sticks out. So you can get those out of your way, that's all the better. When you're lifting the front fender assembly out of the way, these spacers are going to fall out just like in the back, so you want to make sure you don't lose those. And the spacers in the front are longer, a little bit different shaped than the rear ones, so you want to keep those straight so you don't mix them up. Of course I have video evidence of that, so I don't have to worry about it. Now once you've moved it out to this far, you can pull up on this wiring going to the ignition switch here, and you can get to these two quick disconnects, so you can remove the fender assembly without removing the key switch from the fender. Real high tech here. You can see it's two wires, so you can see why it's so easy to hotwire one of these. I'm sure a lot of these get stolen, and all it's a matter of doing is cutting the wires and putting them together with a switch. More evidence of mice infestation on this thing. Of course, in the earlier videos you probably saw a lot of the damage they had done in the battery box compartment, chewing on wiring. With the rear fender assembly and mud flap assembly completely removed, I was able to get enough leverage on here with a good screwdriver to break this screw loose that holds the last screw holding on this guard.